The next show will start in 1 minute.
Streaming live from the Paul and Catherine Ranke Memorial Studio, this is TV Free Baltimore. Support for TV Free Baltimore comes from viewers like you. Become a TV Free Baltimore member by visiting patreon.com/TV Free Baltimore.
Afternoon, everybody. Jimmy Mathis Show here with you on TV Free Baltimore every Sunday around 7:30, 8 o'clock. An awful lot to get to this week. A busy week for President Biden. We'll be breaking down his proposed budget, which is over in Congress right now, what that means for small businesses and for you in general. A lot of misinformation coming out of exactly what is in that budget. Also, the controversy that is surrounding the Walt Disney Corporation right now. And on Monday, President Biden coming out and saying that he would be tapping into the strategic oil reserves, unprecedented to the level that he is doing it. We will be peeling the onion back on that. Real quick, some news for the show. JimmyMathisLive.com is now up and running. You can catch current shows there, also past episodes. You can get commentaries from me that we'll be incorporating into the program. Also, upcoming speaking engagements. We're going to be taking the show on the road. Also, an audio podcast we will be launching next week. This is now our distribution platform, ladies and gentlemen. If you like the program, if you like what we're doing here, I ask you to like it on our social media platforms, to subscribe on YouTube, to share the content. This is a town hall, and you're a big part of it. In order for this to be successful, I need your help. I appreciate your support, and please share our content so we can help get the word out. Last Monday, President Biden coming out saying that he was going to tap into the strategic reserves for oil. This is important, ladies and gentlemen. This is really unprecedented. Not that the reserves have been tapped into. George Bush did it under Katrina. He also did it at the beginning of the Gulf War. To give some context into what we're talking about, Joe Biden right now, President Biden, is looking to tap 1 million barrels per day for the next 6 months out of the emergency reserves. If this were to go through for the 6 months, which we believe it will, this will deplete our emergency reserves by 1/3. We're talking about 500 million gallons of gas. Compare that to what Bush did under Katrina, which was 11 million. Now, the purpose of these reserves, obviously, it's in the name. It's for an emergency. It's for unforeseen circumstances, as was Katrina and the Gulf War. Right now, President Biden is blaming the spike in oil prices on two things. We'll get to his sound momentarily. Obviously, Vladimir Putin, who has become the boogeyman for absolutely everything, and corporate greed. That will also tie into our next segment when it comes to his billionaires tax that was proposed and sent over to Congress. The difference between what George Bush had used the reserves for and what Joe Biden is using them for is actually quite simple. Joe Biden is using them for market manipulation. We've seen it here at the state level also with Peter Franchot, our comptroller, doing the 30-cent gas reprieve. Make no mistake about it. This is not dealing with a national crisis, even though that is the way that they're framing it right now in the situation over in Ukraine. We'll get to that momentarily. But they're using it for market manipulation. Gas prices were skyrocketing before tanks were rolling in to Ukraine because of policies put in place by this administration. There really is no ambiguity in that. There have been an absolute assault when it comes to the leases, a lot of misinformation about that, and we have seen the war on energy. The reality is this administration wants to see gas prices go up. Maybe they didn't expect them to go up as significant as they are, but they have wanted them to go up. Why? To push electric vehicles. The reality is really twofold on this. First of all, most Americans don't have $100,000 laying around to purchase a Tesla. Second of all, we're only talking about cars. Keep in mind, oil is used for a lot of things beyond just fueling motor vehicles. Plastics, manufacturing, obviously the oil that goes in our cars. Everything gets to the store via truck. Also train. Keep in mind, most trains are running off of diesel. This ricochets through almost every aspect of our economy. Now, what the president is saying here, we'll get to the sound in 1 second, is the problem that we're seeing is twofold. This is Putin's fault. Second of all, it is corporatists that are taking advantage of a bad situation. President Biden earlier in the week. Go.
But as I've said from the start, Putin's war is imposing a cost on America and our allies and democracies around the world. Today, I want to talk about one aspect of Putin's war that affects and has real effects on American people. Putin's price hike that Americans and our allies are feeling at the pump. I know how much it hurts. As you've heard me say before, I grew up in a family like many of you where the price of a gallon of gasoline went up. It was discussion at the kitchen table. Our family budgets, your family budgets, to fill a tank, none of it should hinge on whether a dictator declares war.
Here's the problem with this, Mr. Biden. I'll go ahead and play along. If the actions of Putin right now are increasing our natural dependence on oil, or our lack thereof, to the point where you need to tap into 1/3 of the national reserves, then America absolutely has a horse in this fight. It is leading to a national security crisis. You can't have it both ways. On one hand, he is basically saying that the war in Ukraine is not our war. On the other hand, he is saying that the actions of this dictator, it is coming to the homeland right now. The problem is when they tap into these reserves, it takes years to replenish. It is also putting us at a disadvantage if some unforeseen situation were to happen here in the States. An actual emergency where we need those reserves. Reading from the Washington Post real quick. This is the Washington Post. What are the downsides of using the oil reserves? First, it's that there is less oil to pull from in a future crisis. Building the reserves back up requires the government to purchase more oil, and that may take years. The last president to replenish the reserves was Donald Trump. He was able to do it at a very low cost because Donald Trump had opened the spigot when it comes to drilling. He made a point of his presidency on being oil independent. The Biden administration right now could be purchasing futures to purchase oil at a later date at a lesser cost. They're not doing that because this is straight market manipulation. The article in the Washington Post goes on to say the second is the impact on the climate. Environmentalists want the U.S. to drill and consume less oil. That's what we were talking about earlier. That is why there is a war on oil. The prices have been artificially propped up higher to put more hurt on the American people to drive them to electric vehicles. Article goes on. Biden tried to counter that criticism by saying that he would also invoke a law known as the Defense Production Act to have American companies produce materials for batteries used in electric cars. Similar to what he did with the pandemic, where they had distilleries were producing hand sanitizers. Using the Defense Act, what? To push something that America, the reality, is not ready for right now. Again, I keep coming back to the major problem with this that I have is tapping into our reserves for one reason and one reason only, which is market manipulation. We're seeing market manipulation at the state level with Peter Franchot putting this 30-cent per gallon reprieve on gas. Eventually, when all these things expire, what is the end result? when we're no longer having 1 million barrels per day being pumped into the market after we've depleted our reserves by 1/3, and if and when, which they'll have to, the state increases gas by 30 cents. It's going to be a major economic impact. Keep in mind, as we're seeing right now, when the cost of fuel goes up, it radiates through all sectors of our economy. And as the president said, and he is absolutely correct, it disproportionately hurts Americans that are driving their vehicles. But it is not limited to that, ladies and gentlemen. And right now, most Americans are asking a very simple question, which the federal government cannot answer, which is, why are we not becoming more dependent on ourselves? We were doing this only a few years ago. Say what you will about Donald Trump. He may have had some issues, no question about that. But when it came to being energy independent, he was opening the leases in a significant, meaningful way, not just the rhetoric that we're hearing from Joe Biden. And right now, everything is being blamed on Putin, on this war in Ukraine, even though only 10% of our oil comes from Russia, not to mention the supply chain issues, the hyperinflation, the cost at the pump, all was going up significantly before the war started. And as we covered last week in great detail, who are we turning to right now? Other bad players around the world: Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iran. We're going right back to the same problems that we're in right now when it comes to these other players. And the majority of Americans are saying, why don't we get back to focusing on being energy independent? Even those that support electric cars. And keep in mind, electrical vehicles come with their own set of problems. Looking at the lithium batteries, not good for the environment. These vehicles, not affordable for the majority of Americans. Not to mention, all these cars have to be plugged into a wall somewhere, which is either powered by nuclear or by coal. The infrastructure is simply not there. And the technology is not there in a widespread way right now. It simply doesn't exist. Meanwhile, while we are seeing hyperinflation, we are seeing stagnant wages, we are seeing legitimate, very bad numbers when it comes to employment. I'm not talking about the 3.5 or whatever that they were touting last week. We've talked about this ad nauseum over the years. The reason why the unemployment is so low is because you have tens of millions of Americans that have officially stopped looking for work. They're coming off the labor rolls. They're not being factored into the numbers. And even those that do have jobs, as many Americans are seeing right now, their wages are not increasing with the cost of goods and services, not even close. So for the president to come out on the unemployment numbers and be touting that as some win is incredibly disingenuous, as was his tax proposal that we'll be getting to in 1 second. Reality is the cost of everything is going up. You have large portions of the American population that have stopped looking for jobs. Wages are not at a level to keep up with inflation. We still have supply chain issues. We still have an energy crisis. And right now, the federal government is looking at market manipulation as some sort of a stopgap on it, instead of actually trying to solve the underlying problem. If the president was talking about legitimately opening up drilling and refining over the next 6 months, which he is not. He has been very upfront and proud of the war on oil, on energy. And he's now blaming this on Putin and on corporate greed. Is there a part of that may be playing into this? Possibly. But where was that 3 years ago when gas was at $1.30, $1.40 a gallon? Keep in mind, I'm taking the president at face value. He has made a point of saying he wants to drive the cost of energy up, and he's done a very good job at it. Maybe he's done too good of a job. So again, using these emergency reserves to maybe pump the brakes slightly, he sees as a short-term solution. But here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. At most, how much are we actually going to be saving at the pump? 15 cents, 20 cents, and actually that's high by many of the economists out there. Even here in the state of Maryland. We were talking to Brian Sayers about it last year. Peter Franchot with his survival checks and his 1 month reprieve when it comes to the Maryland state gas tax, we saw a 30-cent discount. Is that having, and I'm not dismissing what 30 cents per gallon is, but we're still seeing gas at $3.75. Has it had a meaningful impact in your pocketbook? Honestly, has it? It should, because it's costing about $8 billion. That right now will probably be built into the baseline budget. Spending money we don't have. We're we're definitely not going to have it moving forward at the state level. This at a time when the federal government, and specifically the Biden administration, is pushing the second version of Build Back Better. More spending, more unsustainable debt, while we are already seeing what the consequences of that have been, which have been hyperinflation. The other big news from Washington last week was the president had submitted his budget, and there was a huge little part of this that got some coverage earlier in the week. Now, keep in mind, the president submits a budget to Congress. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the budget that we're going to get, but what it does do is it gives you a glimpse into what the wishes are from the White House. Reality is they're trying to figure out a way to raise taxes, and they did this with the quote-unquote billionaires tax. I want to dive into this and try to explain it. Whether this happens right now or not, this is definitely where the federal government wants to go. They are being completely disingenuous. For those of you that may not be familiar with radio terms, disingenuous is a nice way of saying bold-faced lie, which it is. First of all, the billionaires tax, we'll get the sound from the president in 1 second, actually has nothing to do with billionaires. This comes back to what the government does best, which is a divide and distract, pitting one segment of the population against the other. We see it with race, we see it with gay straight, we see it with immigration, and obviously we see it with the rich against the poor. In the past, ladies and gentlemen, taxes are usually generated because of action. If you go and you make money, you're paying an income tax. Once you have that money, if you are going to go purchase something, you will pay a sales tax. If you buy a gallon of gas, you will pay a gas tax. There are regressive taxes that have been thrown on over the years when it comes to specific purchases. A bag tax, a tax on booze, a tax on tobacco. But all of these taxes come at a point of action. This was a big thing, by the way, with the Supreme Court many years ago under the Affordable Care Act with Barack Obama. If you remember, is it a fee or is it a tax? Originally, the way that the bill had labeled the penalty for not purchasing health care was it was a tax. And the Supreme Court said that won't work. You can only tax something when it's action. That was when they changed it from a tax to a fee. If you go and after you have paid your taxes on your income, if you decide to invest it and buy a stock and the stock goes up, for people that aren't familiar with the stock market, that would be an unrealized gain, meaning it's a gain on paper. You don't pay a tax on that until you sell that stock, and then you pay a capital gains on the money that you've made on that transaction. What the president proposed this week, and we're going to get the sound from him because it is very, very significant. Other countries have done it, and most countries that have backpedaled off of it because of the disaster that it has had on their economies. What he is proposing is a wealth tax. What he's trying to tax you on, and we will dive into this because it's a little bit disingenuous, is he's saying that this is only going to affect billionaires. So generally speaking, don't worry about it. This is just the uber rich who aren't paying their fair share. They pay less taxes than teachers and firemen. He leaves out police officers on that now. The three of them used to be looped together. They're not paying their fair share. We're going to rip through why all of this is a bunch of lies. But what is really important is that you listen to what he wants, which is a portfolio tax. Wants to tax annually on the value of what a portfolio is, even though it is only a profit on paper. Where the numbers are and where this tax begins to be implemented is elementary and really doesn't matter. Because like we have seen so many times with this government, everything is a slow creep. They know that where they ultimately want to go isn't going to resonate with the American people. They know they can't get it all at once, so they systematically do a slow creep forward. And by the time people realize what's actually going on, it is so ingrained into our society, there's no way to get rid of it. They're notorious for this. Obviously, right now, there is a war on wealth. There is a war on capitalism. There is a war on the rich. The government does a very good job with a lot of the people that are legitimately hurting right now of saying that you are poor because these people are rich. They have demonized wealth, which is they're not paying their fair share. This guy is rich on the backs of whatever the segment is. And it's very important, rhetorically speaking, why they demonize wealth. Because once wealth is evil, then it makes it easier to seize it. And that's why it's always being portrayed as we're only going after the uber rich. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, the top 1%, which we hear about all the time, the top 1% is paying 40% of the taxes in this country. Now, is there a difference between income tax versus capital gains tax? Absolutely. And the reality is, it is the poor Americans that carry the heaviest burden when it comes to taxation through regressive taxes, meaning sales tax. If you're making $100,000, 6% is going to have more of an economic impact on your personal wallet or purse than somebody that's worth $100 million. The percentages may be the same. Capital gains is going to be less than income tax. Now listen, over the course of American history, capital gains has been significantly higher than it is right now. And if the president simply wanted to have a conversation about raising capital gains tax, then be honest about it and frame it as such. But that's not what he's talking about. What he's talking about is taxing unrealized gains. President Joe Biden earlier in the week selling this tax pitch to the American people.
Right now, billionaires pay an average rate of 8% on their total income. 8%, that's the average they pay. Now, I'm a capitalist, but if you can make $1 billion, great. Just pay your fair share. Pay a little bit. A firefighter and a teacher pay more than double the tax rate that a billionaire pays. That's not right. That's not fair.
Yeah, it's not right, and it's not fair. The reality is the rich are paying the majority of the taxes out there. There really is no question about that. But again, this is the class warfare that we've been talking about time and time again. And keep in mind, capital gains tax, is the same ratio whether you're a millionaire, a billionaire, a teacher, a fireman. Also, by the way, a lot of these pensions that teachers and firemen have, they are directly tied into Wall Street. What he is trying to do right now is start out with what he is calling billionaires. Although if you read the bill, it's actually not billionaires. It is people that have a net worth of over $100 million. Now, to most Americans out there, they go, if you have $100 million, why not pay a little more? The problem with this is, first of all, we're not talking about billionaires. We're not talking about people that have 400 million. We're talking about 100 million. And what we're talking about is a portfolio tax. And once that has been established, that is a slow creep into deposit taxes. How much do you have in your 401k? How much do you have in your bank account? How much do you have in unrealized gain in the stock market? Now, what they're saying is, in the beginning, you have 10 years to pay. This would be an annual tax, by the way. Keep in mind, this is not actual money. This is money on paper. It has not been realized. You have not sold a stock. Stocks go up and down all the time. There is an ebb and flow to every market out there. In theory, and not in theory, in actual practice, there are many Americans that would have portfolios where they would not have the liquidity to pay the taxes on those portfolios, thereby forcing them to liquidate a portion of their portfolio just to pay the taxes on speculative gains. It's not a gain until you sell the stock. What the government really wants, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, is to tap into the last untapped source of real wealth in this country, which is not the millionaires and billionaires. And by the way, there's a huge difference between a millionaire and a billionaire. What they really want is retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, people that have worked their entire life that may have $500,000 or $700,000, maybe $1 million for their retirement, able to tax that. They're already taxing it, by the way, when you do withdrawals, early withdrawals, transfers, even Social Security, which I think is ridiculous, you're paying income tax on. What they want is to be able to tax that money annually. And this is the camel's nose under the tent to do that. To tax somebody on speculative gains, not realized gains, not on action, on speculation. The ramifications of this, and we have seen it with other countries that have tried this, is it smothers investment. It kills entrepreneurship. Joe Biden is not a capitalist. He does not believe in capitalism. And we were talking about that in the first segment with the market manipulation of the energy markets. Of course he doesn't believe in capitalism. And the point that he is making time and time again is that the rich are not paying their fair share, which is a bold-faced lie. It's easy to look at somebody that has a lot of money and go, well, can't you pay more? Especially when Americans are hurting. The real question here is, why are they hurting so much? In large part because of draconian taxation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are working, just to keep the math simple, if you are working a $100,000 a year job, a salary job, you are personally paying 7.5% into FICA. Your employer is paying 7.5% into FICA. Your employer is paying in unemployment insurance. You're paying probably 28% in income tax. If you own a house, you're paying real estate tax. Anything you buy with your leftover money, you're paying a sales tax. After your money has been taxed on income and you buy gas, you're paying a gas tax, both state and federal. Then you have the regressive taxes we were talking about earlier. Tobacco, booze, bag tax, any of these things. Not to mention any goods that you purchase got here by truck, which means that gas was taxed. Not to mention the labor to get the goods from production through transportation. Taxes in this country are ludicrous. And what the Democrats are correct about, not that the rich are not paying their fair share, it's that the American people are being smothered by overtaxation. And yes, those at the lower rungs of the economic ladder are absolutely doing maybe more heavy lifting. The answer isn't to get the top contributors to pay more that will jeopardize the successful market that we have been in, that will stifle job creation, that will stifle capitalism and speculation and all the things that have led this country to a fairly simple, basic concept to a world superpower in a couple hundred years. But maybe it would be to take the boot off of the American people's throat when it comes to draconian overtaxation. But again, what are we talking about in Washington, D.C. right now? Build Back Better. They were coming in at $15 trillion on that thing. And now because it's only $5 trillion, it's some huge win, this country is bankrupt right now. I've said it time and time again, and I will continue to. Most countries do not collapse because of invasion. They collapse from within. And usually it is only a handful of pillars that fall. Number one is usually debt. Number two is usually immigration. What are we seeing right here in America? And by the way, those two issues are very interlocked. We're absorbing millions of people, and now with the news coming out of Washington last week, more and more and more people will be coming across the southern border that we are now responsible to take care of. At a time when you look at hyperinflation, the cost of fuel, the cost of housing, the cost of everything, with stagnant wages or people that have just stopped looking for work. It's very scary, ladies and gentlemen. And yet, what do we hear from the president? More class warfare. That the rich aren't paying their fair share. Now, if you want to raise the capital gains tax, raise the capital gains tax. But he's not talking about capital gains. He's talking about unrealized gains. And where that eventually ends up is when you have X amount in your savings account, you are paying a tax on that. That's not what he's talking about right now, but I promise you that's where he's heading. You will be paying an annual tax on that. And they're already sort of justifying it, by the way. And they used real estate as an example. You pay a real estate tax on your property every year. I actually thought it was a very clever way of justifying a portfolio tax, a wealth tax, whatever you want to call it. Keep in mind, there are lots of Americans that have had homes for many years, maybe passed down within their families over the generations, where all of a sudden the neighborhood picks up. And it goes through a revitalization, and home values skyrocket. Some of these people may have their homes paid for, and they lose those homes because the taxes go up, the property taxes go up to a point that they can't pay. So what do? They liquidate their homes, and they have to move. We saw it all over the place in Washington, D.C. over the last 20 years. We've seen it here in Baltimore, by the way, through the revitalization of Canton and Harbor East in Baltimore. It's not right, ladies and gentlemen, and we're seeing a complete transformation of the way tax works in this country. And what the president is doing is capitalizing on the hurt that many Americans are feeling right now to pit one American against the other and to slow creep into what they ultimately want, which is to go after that last untapped bit of American wealth, which is 401ks and IRAs. Keep in mind, there are many Americans right now that are living paycheck to paycheck. There are many Americans that are independent contractors that are working multiple part-time jobs, or their employers are not participating in these retirement accounts. Most Americans don't have them. And maybe that's why a lot of Americans don't really think much of this right now. Even though if you look at the plan that the president's talking about, it's a bold-faced lie. He's calling it a billionaire's tax. It's not a billionaire's tax. He's saying that it only affects 730 people. Then what are we even talking about? When you have unfunded liabilities in this country right now that are approaching $250 trillion. The president has the audacity to talk about being some sort of fiscal hawk, torpedoing President Donald Trump because of the deficits that Trump ran up under the pandemic. I disagreed with that, by the way. I thought, if anything, we should have reopened the American economy. Thought we would have gotten through COVID one way or another. The ridiculous debt that we dumped on this country and on our children as a result of the pandemic, I never agreed with. But that was an unprecedented time. The entire American economy shut down. I would hope right now we're doing better than we did then. And again, I did not agree with the spending that Donald Trump did during that time. Will this make it through Congress right now? I don't know. Probably not. But they keep coming down this road and they keep pushing it. They keep seeing if it will land. And the narrative that we keep hearing is firemen, teachers. It's not fair. It's not fair. Why? Because of the millionaires and billionaires. Even though we're talking about portfolios that are only worth, not only, but are worth $100 million. Well, that's 1/10 of a billionaire. Some more sound from President Joe Biden earlier in the week on his minimum billionaire income tax.
The Trump tax cuts added $2 trillion in deficit spending and largely helped the rich and the largest corporations. Under my plan, as I said, no one making less than $400,000 a year will pay additional single penny in taxes. No one. If you don't make $400,000, you're not going to pay a single penny in additional federal taxes.
It's a lie. He's not talking. You see, this is the problem. He keeps labeling this. It's a bold-faced lie. I don't know how else to put it. Not talking about income. That's the whole point of this thing. And ladies and gentlemen, I need to hammer this home because it's a significant part of his proposal. He's not talking about income. He's talking about the value of a portfolio. That is totally different than income. It's not somebody making $400,000. There's another version of it where he's diving into that, where it does tie into income. He's talking about going after portfolios, unrealized taxes, not salaries, not income. They're two very, very, very different things. And to sit here and just listen to him completely lie about it, it needs to set up flags. And you're not hearing the pundits out there. They take it, they run with it, they let it go. They don't dissect it. There is no critical thinking right now into looking to what this government wants to do, and even worse than that, looking into other countries that have done it and the horrific consequences that it has had on their economies. And that is why they have backed off of it. Most countries that have implemented a wealth tax have retreated. I remember this was under the Clinton administration. They did a yacht tax on boats that were worth more than, I want to say it was $100 million. It was a very high number. All of a sudden, rich people, the uber rich, they just stopped buying these boats. And the economic impact from the manufacturing to fuel to maintenance to crew to everything that goes into operating one of these mega yachts, it rippled through the economy in certain sectors. I'm not saying it had broad impact, cost people their jobs. What do we see time and time again when the government gets involved in the private sector? Usually it squashes it. It squashes invention and innovation. It always has. And what do? They continue to ramp it up. This country was built on the Industrial Revolution. It was built on the American spirit. It was built on limited taxes, limited government. And now what the president is trying to do is tap into a wealth tax. And they have been dancing around this for a long time. Same thing like with the estate tax and double taxation on dividends and things that most people don't really care about because it doesn't intimately affect them until it does. And all of a sudden, the billionaire tax, which he's flat out lying about, it's not billionaires. Now all of a sudden it comes down to every person's stock portfolio. And make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, that is eventually where this goes. Also, earlier in the week, DeSantis in Florida, a lot of criticism. Walt Disney World. I'm not going to dive too deep into this because I like having a show and I may want to work somewhere in the future. And anytime you take an opinion on this in this woke culture, it's basically political suicide. The Don't Say Gay bill, even though that's nowhere in there. Something I've spent a lot of time with over the years on the radio show and now here on the TV show is the indoctrination that goes on in our schools. I think that came to light with a lot of parents during COVID because of virtual learning. They got to see exactly what their kids are being exposed to in the schools. I am really at wit's end when it comes to public education in this country, to what is being shoved down our children's throats, the indoctrination, and generally speaking, the overall crappy education that they're receiving K through 12. And by the way, it also extends into higher education in the universities. Ladies and gentlemen, the reality is you have kids that are coming out of high school that need remedial classes to attend community college. I am sick and tired of hearing these politicians constantly talking about education, and all they're talking about is infrastructure. We need more money for schools. We need more money for schools. They don't have air conditioning. Never do you hear these politicians talking about what is being taught in the classroom, about education, about real world practice and education to get these kids ready for the 21st century. You're not hearing curriculum, you're not hearing accountability, you're hearing infrastructure spending. Because like all politicians, the only thing they can do to fix any problem is throw money at it. Ukraine, $800 million for humanitarian effort. We don't know where it's going. We just saw it with all the fraud that came on the COVID money, on the PPP. And education right now, Maryland, by the way, was number one in education for 6 years in a row. What was that based on? Not on outcome standards, on how much money we're dumping into public education. Right now, Baltimore City schools, you're getting like $24,000 per pupil. What the governor of Florida is saying is, don't teach sex to 8-year-olds. And the Walt Disney Corporation is losing their mind over this. Frankly, I think it's sick. It has nothing to do with being homophobic. It has nothing to do with homosexuality. Leave it out of the classroom. When you get these kids to a point where they don't need remedial classes to go to community college, then we can start talking about the cultural indoctrination that we're seeing. And I'm sorry, I love Walt Disney World, taking my family there. Why are you picking a bone in this fight? Because you're afraid of your employees. And that's exactly what it is. This is a bad move for Disney. And by the way, with all due respect to Walt Disney Corporation, they're not exactly the best at being culturally sensitive. If you want to go down this road, then let's go ahead and roll with it. Song of the South, how'd that work out for you? Aladdin, praise Allah. Bambi, okay, like, poor mother walking down North and Penn. The Lion King, look at the Lion King, okay? The Elephant Graveyard, there's references to the Third Reich, and Disney's picking the wrong fight on this. I'm going to tell you something, and you're not going to hear this anywhere else, but Disney has outpriced most Americans. They really have. Go to Walt Disney World, go to Disneyland. It has become so expensive, it is unaffordable. I don't mean to be offensive on this, but it is what it is for most Americans to go there. Walt Disney World is filled with people from other countries that may not be as culturally as enlightened as we are here in America. From their own customer base, they're making a mistake going down this road. And is really no role for it. And if you look at what Walt Disney's original purpose was when he created originally Disneyland in Anaheim, California, and then Walt Disney World, was to create this magical place where kids can just be kids. And that's all DeSantis is saying in Florida. Leave the schools for education, which they're doing a really bad job at right now. And parents have seen, I'm sorry, I have respect for teachers, for the most part, and for administrators. But right now, you have local education. And by the way, this is radiating through to the private schools. Not as bad, but it is. That have lost parental sovereignty at the state and local level because of the Department of Education, because of No Child Left Behind, because of Common Core. And now what you are seeing is a Karl Marx strategy, which was the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto, which was public education for indoctrinating purposes. You were seeing it with race, you're seeing it with homosexuality, you're seeing it with green energy, with climate change. You're seeing it all over the place right now. saw a lesson plan coming out of high school. I'm not going to name it. Sure I will. It was over in Parkville, okay, on environmental racism. Give me a break, man. And you have parents that are standing up. This bill has nothing to do with homosexuality. It is about keeping sex education away from 8-year-olds. Frankly, it's sick. It really is. And the fact that the CEOs over at Walt Disney would cave to their employees, I think is despicable. And I'm glad DeSantis is fighting back on this. I really am. You know, Disney operates in Orlando as its own government, Buena Vista. It has its own police department, its own fire department, its own city council. And now they're seeing some pushback from the governor. And I really think they are picking the wrong fight on this. And it's a shame because I grew up on Disney movies and my children grew up on Disney movies. And I went to Walt Disney World as a child. I've taken my daughters to Walt Disney World. And it is a magical place. And what Walt wanted from the very beginning was for kids to be able to be kids and for it to be a magical experience. And now they are picking up with what is now the disaster of America's public educational system. I said this in jest, and I'm actually beginning to believe it. I have never been a fan of all these cameras. We have red light cameras, speed cameras, surveillance plane downtown, security cameras. Why not put cameras in the classroom? Honestly. Where parents can actually see what is going on day in, day out. I don't agree with any of these other cameras, but if that's the way it's going to be, at least let's see what is being indoctrinated in these children. And it is indoctrination. It absolutely is. And it's tying into sexuality and racism and class warfare. And meanwhile, they're not getting a basic education at the same time. And the race issue is being thrown down our children's throat nonstop in classes that should be dedicated to political science, the social studies. And these kids are coming out of school with no understanding of the American Revolution, separation of power, co-equal branches of government, the American Revolution, negative liberty, and any of these things. No basic understanding of American history, world history, because they're too busy getting woke. And I think it's time that parents stand up on this. And I'm happy to see what's happening in Florida right now. I know it's not going to happen here in the state of Maryland. And all I would ask is for those that are currently serving in the state legislature and for all those that are running right now in the upcoming primary, if you want to talk about education, talk about education. And education is parental accountability, parental sovereignty. It's not infrastructure. Infrastructure is important. You have to have a building. You have to have air conditioning. You have to have books. I got it. There's more than enough money, by the way, on the table for that. When I was on the radio show, I held the first mayoral debate on my show with the top 4 runners. And I asked every candidate, and one of them went on to be mayor, and one of them was mayor, if elected, will you hold a full public audit off North Avenue when it comes to the city's public educational system? Obviously, that did not happen. Just throwing money at this, ladies and gentlemen, does not solve the horrific situation that we're dealing with when it comes to education in Maryland and here in the state of, nationally and here in the state of Maryland. Money doesn't fix that. You want to defund the police, defund education until they can get their act together. And if they're going to continue to be indoctrinating sexuality to 9-year-olds, there's a major problem with that. And the fact that parents are standing up for their parental rights, for their parental sovereignty, that they are being labeled as homophobic, is despicable. And this ties back to the lack of messaging and rhetoric that, it's not just conservatives, by the way, this is parents across the board, where you feel like if you stand up for what you want for your child, you're going to be shut down. You're going to be labeled a vast variety of things, a xenophobe, homophobe, bigot, racist, denier when it comes to climate change. You're not allowed to critically think. You're not allowed to have an opinion. You're not allowed to stand up for basic core beliefs. And the most dangerous thing coming out of education right now is kids are not being taught to critically think. And right now, the curriculums should absolutely be published. Parents should have a bird's eye view to what is going on in these schools, and they should be able to make a decision for themselves. And these politicians, because they all run on education, it's all a bunch of horsewash. It really is. All they talk is, we need more money, we need more money. Ukraine, give them money. Education, give them money. Police, they need more money. It's not a money issue. The problem is to actually take a stance, which is what we're seeing in Florida right now. There's a major political liability to it. And most people in politics don't have much of a backbone, and really within the Republican Party. And this is something I believe most Americans can get behind, especially if you have children. It is ridiculous. The ages that we are talking about here should have nothing to do within our public educational system. It's really not. Go to the school, walk down the hall. Okay, see what's on the boards. You don't have to look very deep to see what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. You really don't. And you look at the fire that the governor in Florida has come under, and now Walt Disney World, they're throwing their gasoline on the powder keg. Maybe setting himself up for a presidential run. Because this does land with the majority of Americans. And I really believe from a rhetoric standpoint, we have become so exhausted of being called names over the years. Just gotten tired of it. I mean, we've become immune to it. I think that's what you're seeing right now. Call me whatever you want to call. I don't care. I'm a parent and I care about what's happening to my child. And you're not going to silence us anymore, even in this woke culture. It's getting ridiculous. It's being shoved down our throats at every single turn. And what I'll keep coming back to is for these politicians that pride themselves on education, then start focusing on education and start holding teachers and administrators accountable. It happens in the private schools. You know why? Because parents are paying $20,000 a year or whatever it is these days. There's accountability. And you don't see accountability that much when it comes to education. Just more and more money being thrown at it because it's the easiest, quickest political solution there is. And I think Disney just did a big disservice to their customer base, to their fan base, to their stockholders. And it'll be interesting to see what the political backlash is to a very good thing they have in Orlando. So we'll see what comes out of that. Ladies and gentlemen, always a pleasure being here with you every Sunday at TV Free Baltimore. Again, I encourage you to check out JimmyMathisLive.com. You can check out the show that will be live streamed there. Also, past shows. The articles that I referenced during the program, go to the show prep page. That will be there. At the bottom of the page, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We will be releasing our first one, I believe, in about a month and a half, but you can sign up for updates for the newsletter. At the bottom, direct links to all of our social media platforms, commentaries, a calendar of where the show will be when we take it on the road. Also, speaking engagements, putting together a speaking tour right now that will be kicking off in June. And starting next week, we will be doing a daily podcast that will be available 7 a.m. Monday through Friday. That will also be available at JimmyMathisLive.com. I encourage you, I hate begging, but I have to. I encourage you, if you like what we're doing here on the Jimmy Mathis Show, to subscribe on the YouTube pages, to like it on Facebook, like it on YouTube, share it. Help us disseminate the message because we are relying on you right now to get that message out there. I will constantly work, along with Charles here at TV Free, to find ways to make the show more interactive. As I've said many times, this is a town hall, and I want everybody to be part of it. I appreciate the support everybody has given. Have a great week, everybody. I will see you back here next Sunday live for the Jimmy Mathis Show. Have a great week.